Hello and welcome back to another podcast replay. This is essentially where Christy and I have a look back through our archives. First of all, starting with Women Today, which was way back when, I can't even remember how many years ago. And there are some amazing stories in there, and we want you to have the chance to hear them if you haven't already. Also, we had a little bit of an offshoot series, didn't we? It was called Conister Rocks, and it was when we invited well-known people from the Isle of Man into the studio to tell us about their life through music choices.
And this week, we're giving you another chance to hear a Conister Rocks episode with Roger Smith, OBE, the watchmaker, who learned his craft from Dr George Daniels, who a lot of people may remember lived on the Isle of Man and was a very successful watchmaker. So he chose some music, he told us about his childhood, and he told us what it was like working with the famous Dr George Daniels. Fast and my good afternoon. Thanks to Stu, of course, for talking heads, and to Rianne for the news. It's 6 minutes past 2. I'm Christy DeHaven, and today we're back on the Conister Rock, where we spend an hour sharing music and memories with some of our best-loved island personalities. I'm joined on the rock today by one of the world's finest craftsmen in creating exceptional and highly sought-after pieces, working out of a small studio space in the north of the island. I would say that I'm surprised he found the time to join us, but Roger Smith actually holds time in the palm of his hand. He can manipulate and control it with his keen eye, patient dedication, and extremely nimble fingertips. As a world-renowned watchmaker who crafts his creations from precious metals, gemstones, and the tiniest of handcrafted components, using skills passed down for hundreds of years, he describes his work as the purest of mechanical arts. Roger Smith, I'm delighted you've been able to join us today. Thank you so much for, as we say, finding the time. I had to get that pun in there. You must be so fed up of puns about time, seriously.
That was the best intro ever.
Was it?
Yes.
I am going to save that clip and use it forever. Roger Smith said it was the best intro ever. Hooray! I have to ask you then, talking about time, does what you do with your work make you more sort of keenly aware of the passage of time?
I'm not so sure about that, really. I'm always sort of very punctual. But no, I mean, not at all. It's just this focus on trying to make these, I suppose, very extraordinary watches. And
they are extraordinary. We're going to talk about them much more over the course of the next hour or so. I do love the fact, though, speaking of time, that we ask sort of in our bio questions, we say, is there anything that you particularly dislike? And you dislike lateness.
Of course.
Must be punctual.
Yes, very much so.
Yes, hence shaving those tiny milliseconds off the watches, so make sure that they are punctual. You also describe yourself as a purist. Why is that important to you?
Well, it's about trying to do the very best, really, and in my work, it's about trying to make I suppose, in my view, the ultimate wristwatch. And I suppose, yes, that sort of carries on throughout my life, really, to a certain extent. So, yeah. And
what you do create, they are so beautiful and so incredibly meticulously handcrafted. What more could you possibly do to make the ultimate wristwatch?
It's all about the attention to detail. And so, when I'm designing a watch, I will focus on every single component, and whether it's an apparently insignificant screw or a spring, and I will make sure that spring is elegant, beautiful, well finished, finished beyond most ordinary standards. And it's about chasing this sort of almost unattainable level of perfection. That's what it's about. And if you concentrate on the tiny little components, that at the end of the day, hopefully you have a watch which is, built to an incredible level of quality and so on.
And I know that in some of your timepieces you can see the mechanics, and you make a point of being able to see these sort of beautiful pieces working. But are you even talking about those pieces that people can't even see? Are they even sort of polished and created to the nth degree?
Yes, very much so. I mean, the underdial work, which is basically all the handset mechanism and so on, which is hidden behind a dial. There are components there which will take our watchmakers maybe 2 or 3 days to finish, to take from the very raw component right the way through to the highly polished, nicely beveled component that's ready to drop in a watch. And it can be 2-3 days, sometimes 4 days. It depends on the level of complexity. And it's that sort of attention to detail which sort of attracts me.
And I'm sure, every watch is going to be different. But if I was to say to you, how long does it take to hand make one of your watches? Is there a sort of ballpark time?
I mean, it's a long process. It's probably about 2 years in total. So 2 years from the initial conversations with the client, ironing out the specification that they're wanting in the watch, and once we've sorted out that sort of all that specification, then it's a matter of ordering all the materials to make the watch. So we order the raw materials, the gold, the platinum, the nickel, silver, the steels for the watch, and the build really starts from there. So it's a very long process.
So the client themselves, they do actually have an input in how the watch is going to be at the end?
Very much so. I mean, some people, they like to have, a bit of them in there. So obviously it's a variation on my theme, but they can choose maybe engraving or case material or different sort of styles of finishing and so on. Ultimately, it's my watch. It's got to be within my sort of limitations, but they all like to have a little bit of input.
Has anyone asked you for anything completely outrageous?
No, I mean, many years ago, perhaps, there were odd requests, but...
Go on, tell us some.
No. We've never had to put Mickey Mouse hands on a watch, but...
Are you referring to my Jungle Book watch?
It's very nice. It's a handsome watch.
Do you know, poor Roger, bless him, I'm sure that everyone that meets him does exactly what both Stu and I did and hides the watch that they're wearing, because you must have that from people who just think... But you're not judging what people are wearing, are you?
Not at all, no. I mean, watches are, you can have a very nice watch which costs several pounds from the local petrol station, going up to, one of George's watches. One of his sold recently for over 3 million. So... there's room for everyone. That's the great thing about watches.
Now we'll come to George in just a moment, but I'm intrigued to know then how a young boy growing up in Bolton in the 70s and 80s decides he wants to be a watchmaker.
Yes, well, I didn't know really. That was the thing. So, fortunately, I was always very practical at school, very practical, and didn't really understand school. But my father was sort of, I think he was very good. He understood my limitations, I suppose, and he sort of pushed me in the practical direction. And he heard about a course in Manchester, which was clock and watch repairing. And he suggested I went on that, and it really was a turning point for me.
And was it sort of an instant thing when you started looking at watches? Did you just immediately think, this just fits me?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. I mean, the very first day at college was, for me, the best day of education. Up until that point, I remember, school was, I remember sitting through lesson after lesson in a total dream, really. It just didn't click at all. And didn't make sense. I didn't really understand the purpose of it. But the first day at college, for me, suddenly my world had begun, and that was it, and I was hooked. Really was hooked. And
obviously you have come so far anyway since meeting the late Dr George Daniels, but he does play a very significant part in your story, so we'll talk about him just for a little bit now. But I'm intrigued to know when you first became aware of him, and actually when did you actually realise quite how important he was?
I first met him when I was at this college in Manchester, and he visited the students. The day before we heard that this man, George Daniels, was coming to visit us. I didn't know who George Daniels was. Somebody told me that he made handmade watches, but I didn't believe that was possible, because I'd been surrounded by watches which had been made in the watch industry by mass production. Anyway, so the next day George Daniels arrived, walked in through the door. He's wearing this incredible 3-piece pinstripe suit, superb quality shoes, and I thought, this man, there's something about him who's very special. And I eventually asked what was on the end of this pocket watch chain, which was fixed to his waistcoat, and out came this pocket watch called a Space Traveller. And it was at that moment that I sort of, realised that there's greatness in front of me, and that was it. That's all I ever have wanted to do since, is to make watches by hand. So,
and he was really completely unique, wasn't he? In that he was the only person, I think, in his time, to learn all of the skills necessary to make the watch.
That's right. So when he had ideas for the advancement of the mechanical timekeeper back in the late 1960s, the watchmaking industry in Britain was on its knees. It was virtually disappeared. So he had to learn I think there were 32 trades involved in the creation of a single pocket watch, and he had to master each of these. So case making, dial making, wheel making, plate making, escapement making, the list goes on. It's a huge list, and he perfected every single one of these skills, and that enabled him to create these extraordinary watches.
Because it would have been teams of people sort of on each sort of different skill, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
previously?
it was. Yes, it's very much a cottage industry, and just focusing on individual items, really.
So then you took it upon yourself to think, do you know what? I'm going to learn from this man. Tell us what happened next.
So I was bowled over by him, and again, my father sort of stepped in and bought me a copy of Watchmaking, which is this book written by George, which tells you how to build a watch from start to finish. So he bought me this book for a Christmas present, and I read the book cover to cover, and I think I read it 3 or 4 times. And by the end of it, I was beginning to think that, well, if George could make a watch, well, surely I could make a watch. And that's where it sort of started, and the start of a very long journey.
And it is a beautiful story, and it is documented, sort of considerably. And there is a lovely film. Dave Armstrong made a lovely film, Watchmaker's Apprentice, all about that. And we'll come back to that in a moment, because it's sort of remained part of your story, that movie itself. But do you remember then that moment when you finally mastered even just sort of the notion of getting a watch to tick for the first time?
Yes, the first watch was, when you actually sit down and begin to make a watch, it's a terrifying, daunting prospect, partly because nobody, apart from George, had ever really done it. So I built a small workshop in the garage at home with my parents, and kitted it out with some equipment and began making this watch. But even when I was making the components, I still had no idea that it would tick at the end. Anyway, about 18 months later, it came to the moment where it was about to tick, and it did tick, but it only just ticked. The quality wasn't quite right, and the finishing wasn't quite right. So it was a big step forward, really, because at least I had got past that first hurdle, and really it was the start of the next sort of big journey, really, to perfect all those skills and crafts and so on to make a super watch. That was the challenge.
The sense of achievement in doing that must have been enormous.
Well, yes, I suppose it.
Well, what age were you?
I was 19 then, and but I had this watch which just about ticked, and yes, I was obviously delighted, but I wanted to make a really great watch. I was aware that it wasn't as good as it could have been, so that was the next challenge, to build a watch which would be accepted, something that hopefully at some stage I could sell as well. Ultimately you've got to make it pay. So that was the start of another big journey.
And then eventually you did move to the Isle of Man, and you became, as the film is called, The Watchmaker's Apprentice, and you've obviously come so far since then, and that's what we're going to talk about over the course of this next hour or so. But we'll come to your first song, your first piece of music, and I suppose creative arts in a way was sort of something that was always in your family, certainly back to the gentleman we're going to talk about now, your grandfather, because your first song refers to his sort of creative talents as such, doesn't it?
Yes, he was, he was born in Nelson, son of a baker, and he obviously didn't want to. He wasn't interested in baking, but obviously in the Nelson area, there's a big textile industry. It's huge in that particular region, and he went to night school and he trained as a textile designer, and was very successful as a textile designer. But then he gradually moved up through the ranks and into management. And eventually he ended up being chairman of a company called Carrington Viella. And so he's an impressive man, and I sort of looked up to him And one weekend, my brother and myself, I think my parents were going away for a weekend, and we had to make this huge journey from Bolton over the moors to Burnley. It was on the bus. We'd never done a journey like that before. And so we set off on this big journey that, my mother put us on the bus in Bolton, and I don't know how long the journey was, 3/4 of an hour, and my grandfather was waiting at the other end, and this song was playing in the car.
And it is Petula Clark and Downtown.
Can't forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go downtown, where all the lights are bright. Downtown, waiting for you tonight. Downtown, you're gonna be alright now.
Petula Clark and the excellent Downtown. It's the first choice of music from my studio guest this afternoon. We have Roger Smith on the Conister Rock. Roger, before we go to the ad break and before we move on, I just have to ask you, what was it actually like working with George Daniels? Was he an easy man to work with?
He was very easy if everything was going right. And,
very diplomatic.
He had very strong ideals as to, how his watches should be finished, and quite rightly. But no, he was, there were difficult times. I was still learning. I still had problems. My skills weren't fully formed. And there were times, for example, when I was trying to finish hands for this series of watches we were making, I had to file and cut out of a sheet of gold a very fine seconds hand, and I was really struggling. And I was umming and ahhing whether to ask him if he could give me some advice. And anyway, I did. And, it's a wonderful experience. He had huge hands. I always describe them as being like shovels. And suddenly these huge hands just picked up this delicate seconds hand, a very fine little file, and started almost to caress this metal away, this gold away, and form this perfect, sort of hand. And, while he's demonstrating this, he's talking through the process of it all. And his clarity of thinking was just so perfect. And, it's a great experience. He was a brilliant teacher, really brilliant. And he invested a lot of time in me, so no complaints.
And how does it feel to be the one person that he decided to sort of pass his craft on to?
I don't know if I think about that, really. I always describe it as the greatest finishing school ever. I mean, it was, he's regarded as the world's greatest watchmaker. And so, it was an honour to be there, and great experience.
And you have taken that experience and run with it, shall we say. So we'll be finding out much more about that after the break. Roger Smith is with us on The Rock through till 3 p.m. this afternoon. If you have any questions or comments for him, 166 177.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
One Dental Clinic, sponsors of Women Today, offer convenient appointment times in the heart of Douglas, so you can fit your dental care into your working day.
You are listening to Women Today, but we are on the Conister Rock as per usual on a Friday. Today joined by watchmaker Roger Smith. Roger, we've just talked about your time as the watchmaker's apprentice as such. Do you remember the exact moment when you thought, I am no longer the apprentice, I am now a watchmaker?
Yes. Well, it's a difficult one. You never stop learning in this sort of world. That's the thing that I have learned. I'm just trying to think. It was probably, the whole process has taken so long. I started making the first watch in 1998. Completed it, was it 98? 89. 89, yeah. Completed it 18 months later. The second watch took 5.5 years to make.
So you could argue that your first watch really sort of took almost 7 years to make.
Yeah, it is. It did really. But even then, I was still lacking in skills. So then I moved over here in 98, worked with George for sort of three or so years. And I think it's probably only, several years after that, when my business had been set up for several years, that things really started to click into place. And for the first time, myself and the guys in the workshop actually felt in control of what we were trying to achieve. So it's a huge process. And we're still learning.
And you say yourself and the guys in the workshop, that in itself fascinates me, because George sort of was almost prided himself in his sort of solitary life, didn't he? And as we were saying, it was a big thing for him to share his skills just with one person.
Yes.
But you have a very different approach. You're very generous with your knowledge, and you are sort of building up a team of people that you are sharing your skills with. But why did you decide you wanted to do that?
I enjoy working with people, basically, and it was also, I mean, I like working with people. I find people fascinating, and there's lots I want to do in watchmaking, and I knew I could never achieve that by making one watch a year. It just wasn't feasible. So I took on our first guy, Andy Jones. I think it was about 2003, and we just sort of gradually climbed up from there.
And now, how many people do you have?
There's 11 of us now.
Wow.
And we've just taken on a few more people, 4 more people. So again, the business has taken on a new sort of look and shape and feel, and but with this real drive just to maintain the quality and try and get more of these watches that I have in my head out on paper and into production.
How easy is it to explain to people exactly what is in your head to make that sort of come to life?
Well, I have to do it all. I mean, I'm the sort of chief designer, so I'll spend a good deal of time designing the next watch, and it's a huge process in itself. And then after that, I have to build the prototypes, and then teach everyone how to build these watches, how to finish them, and so on. So it's a huge process to bring a new watch online, as it were. It can be sort of 2, 3, sometimes 4 years.
And it was lovely to hear a story you were telling me off air before about how it's sort of come full circle in a way, because from you being sort of the apprentice of George, you recently had someone contact you who had heard about your story through the film about you being the watchmaker's apprentice. Just tell us what happened after that.
Yes. So I mean, we were advertising for new employees just recently, and one of the guys, he'll be hearing this, so I don't want to embarrass him too much, but he was 15 years old, and he heard about this film, The Watchmaker's Apprentice. He made his family all watch it with him, and they watched it several times, and from that from that point, all he's ever wanted to do is make watches. And he enrolled on a course in Manchester to learn about watchmaking, and the very first job he applied for was to come and work with us. So it's wonderful, it's sort of come full circle, and that film has inspired somebody, which is all you can ask.
Just brilliant. But you wouldn't be here in this position as a watchmaker right now if it wasn't for your father, as you mentioned earlier on. And your next piece of music is something that is somewhat inspired by him.
Yes, I mean, we used to... my father was a rheumatologist in Manchester, and worked terrific hours, huge work ethic. And he needed to escape, so my parents eventually bought a second home up in the Yorkshire Dales, and that almost became a second home, really. We used to spend lots of weekends there and holidays, and in the sort of hour or so car journey up there, we used to listen to various cassettes. I think in the car there was Simply Red, who had just appeared on the market then, Shakin' Stevens, and this Louis Armstrong track, and this was, by far the best track.
Saying how do you do? They're really saying I love you. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow.
Oh, what a voice. And it does seem so wrong to have to lower that voice of Louis Armstrong. You can just picture him smiling now, but we have so much to talk to Roger Smith about. Lovely choice of music. I have to say my mother will be very pleased. It's one of her favourite songs in the world. But Roger Smith, we were talking just before we heard Louis Armstrong there about you building up this team of people on the Isle of Man. Of course, you came here to learn your craft on the island with George. Why did you decide to stay, and why is the Isle of Man so important to you?
Well, I mean, it's yes. I mean, I've always fell in love with the island, really, and I sort of became involved with, met lots of people on the island, and obviously built a team of the workshop here. Met my wife on the island, so it's a great place to work. It's a great place to be.
And it is somewhere that you're very proud of, and I know that you put the Triskelion on every watch that you make,
Yes.
and on your website you say designed and hand built on the Isle of Man, and that's got to be a great thing for the island.
Well, yes, I would have thought so. I hope so. I mean, I know that every single article or feature that's ever done on our work, it's always Isle of Man watchmaker Roger Smith. So, yes, I mean, it gives us identity. You see, the watchmaking industry is predominantly Swiss. And as soon as you mention the Swiss, it's all the Swiss hills and snow-peaked mountains and so on. So for me, it gives a very distinct differentiation between that, what is a very good but also very huge industry. And it just immediately sets us aside from everyone else, which is what I want.
And I suppose in some ways it sort of makes them even more magical, the idea of them sort of coming from this sort of little place in the middle of the Irish Sea. I'm adding too much poetry to it, aren't I? It's ridiculous. Stop it, Christy. But we can't talk about all of your watches. Obviously, you've created a number of them now. But I'm just going to ask you about the Series 1, because that was quite an important watch for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the Series 1 wristwatch was a watch that I sort of conceived when I was leaving the employment of George Daniels. And, suddenly here I was, I had to kickstart a business, really. So I had still, limited knowledge, limited skill. I had limited funds and equipment. And so how on earth do I create a watch which is going to sell? So pocket watches I'd always made up until that point. But really I felt commercially a wristwatch is easier. There's more demand for a wristwatch. So I started to look around for ways in which I could speed up the process, and I ended up buying in parts of a watch from Switzerland, trainer wheels, escapement and so on, and then I hand built the plates around it, designed a calendar mechanism, built the case and hands and so on, and created the Series 1 wristwatch. So it's a big step, really. We made just nine of those pieces, all hand built, in the workshop. Several of them were done by myself, and then when Andy joined me, he took over the production of those. And I think what was for me was fascinating about that sort of process was, here I was on the Isle of Man. How do I sell these watches? And by then, obviously the internet was appearing. More and more people were using it, and how do I sell them? So I took a photograph. My mother had bought a digital camera, what is now a low quality digital camera. Took a photograph of this, put this on a watch forum, and suddenly I was getting phone calls from around the world. And that was incredible. For the first time I realised I could survive outside of a major city, outside of a major watchmaking centre like Switzerland. And that was a big, big moment.
And now you have YouTube hits that go into... What's the latest figure of YouTube hits on your channel? Because it is very high, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's... yes, just to explain, the YouTube, many, many years ago, I was trying to create a differentiation between my work and other people's work. And so I thought that the best way to explain it is to actually video processes. How do I build these watches? And then so these short videos were put up onto YouTube. And I think they've had, across the range of videos, we've had well over 1 million views now. And that's good. It gets the message out there, and it's encouraging a new sort of younger sort of set of people who are trying to make watches, which is brilliant, really.
It's wonderful to know that the young people do still have an interest in sort of handcrafting something, especially the way the world is now, a very sort of throwaway society. Coming back to your first watch then, your next piece of music, I'm so delighted to see some Stone Roses on your list. Yes. Roger Smith, tell us about this.
Well, being from Bolton, Manchester, they were all around. When I went through this huge period where I was just learning, and where I just sort of squirreled myself away in this tiny little workshop and worked for sort of 6-7 days a week, terrific hours. And this was one of the tracks that I used to play in. Yeah, many memories.
10-story love song.
As you lie darkness, this everlasting night. Someday soon, don't know where or when, you're gonna wake up and see the light. 10-story long.
Stone Roses, as chosen by my studio guest this afternoon, Roger Smith, who's on the Conister Rock with us. He's not with us for very much longer. We've got till 3 o'clock if you want to send any comments or questions in. I think, Ken wants to know how to sort out his watch. He's wound the spring too tight, Roger. I don't know if it's easy enough to say that in this quick
I think it needs a service. Just a straightforward service will sort that out.
It needs a service, Ken.
Yes.
There you go. So take it to be serviced. So coming back to, we talked about, that you have obviously a big client list. I mean, first of all, how long is your waiting list at the moment?
Officially, it's about 3.5 years at the moment.
Wow. So you've got to wait 3.5 years, which
Yes.
again is in a way sort of really beautiful, because it just shows how much you would value this piece when it turns up and how important it would be to you.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as a typical Roger Smith customer?
Yes, I would say there is actually, and on the whole, I mean, no, not on the, yeah, a vast proportion of them are self-made, and they're all fascinating people. Really interesting people. They've all, done something with their lives, and that's for me is part of the enjoyment, is meeting these people and finding out who they are and what they have achieved, and some of them have achieved astonishing things.
So you do actually meet them?
Yes, usually at some point. Yeah, so either they come before the order is placed, or during, or to collect the watch. Yes, yeah, there are several clients I've never met, but the vast proportion, yes, do make the trip over here to the island, so it's wonderful.
I have to ask, any women on your client list?
We do. Yes, quite a few. Yeah.
And also very excited to know that you actually have a woman working with you now as well.
We do, yes.
Very excited about that. No, 1 in 11. We need to up that,
Yes,
I think,
2.
a little
Well,
bit.
Caroline, don't
Of course, Caroline as well.
Yes.
Yeah, how could we forget lovely Caroline?
Exactly.
She does a fantastic job. I love the fact, talking about the nature of sort of women having watches. I remember talking to you some years ago, and you were saying how women have jewellery, but the watch sort of serves that purpose for men.
Yes, very much so. I always remember this client coming to visit us, and he was umming and ahhing for quite a while, as to whether to buy one of these watches. And, he wasn't really a watch collector, but he liked what we were doing, and he liked the story, he liked obviously the watch, and he liked to support the skills, the crafts that we are sort of carrying on. And anyway, after several visits, he came round. He said, "I've made a decision. I'm going to order one of these watches." And so I said, "Well, how have you come to this decision?" He said, "Well, I worked out that I've probably spent as much on my wife and jewellery over the years as this watch is going to cost." And I thought that was a lovely fit. That he settled it in his mind, and I thought, brilliant.
That is fantastic. We've got one more piece of music that Roger has chosen, so do stay tuned. We'll have it after the break.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Abbey Dental, sponsors of Women Today, for all aspects of today's dental care. Highly recommended throughout the Isle of Man.
And it is just coming up to 12 minutes to 3. Roger Smith is still with us just for a few minutes. Obviously, Roger, the point of this programme is sharing memories and music. How hard was it to choose the pieces of music that you had to choose?
Well, once I got going, it was a very enjoyable, process, really. Many memories have come back, so yeah, it's great.
Oh, well, I'm glad it was a good process for you. And do you listen to music while you're creating and designing and building watches?
Yes, we do. I mean, we generally just have the radio on and a bit of background music. But yes. I've always enjoyed music.
Yeah, and I should... do you know what? I have not introduced you yet as Roger Smith OBE. You have some extra letters. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's yes, to be recognised for your work is incredible, and a complete surprise when I was told of this news several months ago, and yeah, it's a real honour, really is.
How did you learn about it?
I had a phone call from the governor, who asked if I was sitting down. He had some news to tell me, and so yes, it's lovely Very nice. Asked if I'd accept it. Of course I did. And
Can't really say no, can
No,
you?
no,
Unless you're
no.
the Beatles.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
they did, didn't they? But so all of this told, all this fantastic story, and you sort of really just focusing your entire life really on watchmaking. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball at you. If you weren't a watchmaker, what would you be?
Probably a cabinet maker, because my father sent me on interviews for the watchmaking course and the cabinet making course. And anyway, the cabinet making course shut down just before I went for the interviews. So
It's like
could have been a
fate,
different
isn't
story.
it? It is
Yep.
fate. So we've talked all about these beautiful watches. Obviously, the waiting list suggests that you're probably not really on the lookout for any future clients, considering it takes 3 years now anyway. But if people did want to find out more about you, we've mentioned the YouTube. I love the fact you're also on Instagram now.
Yes, I've been on there for several years now, and again, it's just trying to get the message across, taking little videos of processes and the watches that we make, and you've got to embrace these sort of social media, and I enjoy it. It's a good way of communicating.
Roger Smith, down with the kids. That's all I'm going to
That's
say.
it.
And we were talking earlier about the fact that really your next step should be to make a rap video. I
Yes,
think that would be amazing.
Well, it's got to happen, isn't
It
it?
has got to happen. So thinking back then of what you have created so far then, Roger, what would you say to this point? Because obviously you have many, many more years of fantastic watchmaking ahead of you. And I think actually you would probably be further ahead in your career than George would have been, obviously, at this point in his life. But is there something in particular that you are most proud of, whether it's a timepiece or something you've created? Or
Yeah, I think for me it's the... George left us this incredible escapement, the coaxial escapement, and since we've taken it on, we've been able to really sort of advance it mechanically. I came up with a single wheel version, and this single wheel version enabled me to really improve the mechanical timekeeper as a whole. And today we've recently launched or started delivering our Mark II version of this coaxial escapement. And I think it's sort of, I'd like to say it's probably one of the most technically advanced mechanical watches anywhere in the world. And that's simply because of this coaxial technology. And we have a watch which will now run, I believe, for 10 years without a service. Privately, I'm telling clients 15, 20, 25 years without a service. And this is unheard of in the industry. And this is just because of this incredible coaxial technology and development work we've done. So yeah, I'm hugely proud of that. And there's still a lot more work to do on that escapement and mechanical movement.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you about this today, and we really do appreciate you taking the time, because I know what an exceptionally busy man you are, Roger. So thank you for being with us. Just before we go, then, we have one final piece of music. Just tell us what it is and why you've chosen it.
Yes, this is Vidor's Toccata, and I don't know, for me it's just incredibly powerful music, powerful bit of music, and I think I'm very interested, people amaze me, what they can create. And the fact that this guy could sit down, write this piece of music, and it can create such emotion, for me is wonderful. And that's the great side of people.
Roger Smith, it's been such a joy. Thank you so much. We will finish with this piece of music, which I believe was also played at your wedding. We should mention that too.
Yes.
If you've missed any part of today's programme, you will, of course, be able to go back and listen again after the programme. And if we will have some video on our Facebook and YouTube channels too. But for the time being, Roger Smith, thank you. This is Toccata. Wonderful stories and music choices from Roger Smith there, the watchmaker. And we mentioned George Daniels just this month, in fact, November 2022, when Beth and I are recording this. A George Daniels wristwatch sold for £3,616,900. And just a matter of days ago, one of Roger's own handmade watches sold in an online auction for £660,000, which is the second highest to be achieved at auction by a British watchmaker.
Wow.
I know, exactly. Imagine wearing that on your wrist and going to a nightclub.
Gosh, you just wouldn't, would you? You really wouldn't. Ooh.
You wouldn't know, but thank you so much for Roger for sharing his memories there.
And as ever, keep an eye out. We will have more replays in the near future, but you can find the whole list of podcasts from Women Today and later Late Lunch if you go to manxradio.com.